Hey, Greg. Hey, Peter. Welcome to Mass Construction Show.
Thanks for having us.
Morning.
Yeah. Greg's kind of old hat at this, but Peter, welcome.
Thank you.
Had a few other Consigli folks over the years, but today's episode is going to be, I'm going to say pre-con, but it really kind of stemmed from purchasing. And I'm excited because I am going to learn, because I don't know what purchasing really does either. So that's kind of the goal of today's show is, I'm pretty good friends with Greg, and he says that he's a purchaser, and I theoretically know what that is, but like, well, how are you? I'm all, well, how are you different than this? Like, what do you really do? And I know I'm not alone. Now, maybe most of the folks that are in bigger companies have a better sense, obviously, of what purchasing does, and you go to the Turners of the world, and they start having titles like cost engineers, and I think, either of you have cost engineers?
No.
Yeah.
No.
So, there's these positions, and depending on whether you're working for a small tenant fit-out company or a large corporation, there's different names for things. So, what I really want to do today is kind of demystify, I guess. I just came up with that at that moment. I'm impressed. Demystify what purchasing is and shine some light on maybe that whole process of pre-construction. So for starters, I would say for, a college student or a person who's, even someone like myself who's kind of very naive to this space, Peter, could you kind of just give us a, 30,000 foot description of what is pre-con, what is estimating, what is purchasing?
Sure, yeah. So when you start with pre-con, you're basically taking a client's napkin sketch of what they want to build and fit that within a budget and a time frame that's what they want. So it's very, very preliminary. Once you get to the point where you have a developed plan, a set of documents, it moves into estimating. Then estimating can put it out on the street for pricing. Once the estimate is approved, then the purchaser jumps in and can start buying the job out, hiring the trades. So that's basically 30,000 square feet.
Okay. So I kind of always understood it as pre-construction being kind of the overall process, and then those different things as being part of it. Is that fair, or is it? Or do you think of pre-construction as something distinctly different?
Well, everyone's collaborating together, right? So everyone's working together, but we definitely have three distinct groups. And the pre-con group starts it all off. Like I said, they have the expertise and the knowledge to actually bring, like I said, a real conceptual plan to fruition, and hopefully within budget and schedule. And then we move that into estimating, but there's a slight overlap and transition. But once it's defined enough to put it out for bid or to price it, then it moves into estimating, then it moves into purchasing after that. Do we all collaborate together? Do we all work together at some point in time? Absolutely. Is pre-construction overall the big picture, overseeing everything? I don't see it as that. It's kind of like it's a team that just moves through the different areas of expertise.
Okay. Do you, how you understand this?
I would layer on that a little bit differently. To describe the Gilbane approach, we call pre-construction support operations, and pre-construction is really planning to build the building before the first shovel hits the ground, and that's obviously cost, but also schedule, logistics, coordination, that sort of thing. So pre-construction at Gilbane is 5 different disciplines, and we jokingly call them the 5 families, right? And we have a 5-family review before any proposal comes in the door. Estimating, scheduling, purchasing, VDC or BIM coordination, and IDC or interdisciplinary document control, basically a constructability review, a design conformance review of the documents that we're working on. So, those teams are working in collaboration to set a project up in pre-construction, quote unquote, obviously well before a shovel hits the ground, to make sure that we're basically mock building the building from a cost standpoint, schedule standpoint, logistics before that boot first hits the ground. So we all have our distinct roles, obviously, but there is at least at Gilbane a fair amount of collaboration to make sure that we're all talking the same language, because a schedule has an impact on cost. The design conformance of the documents has an impact on cost, so on and so forth. So we need to collaborate to make sure the cost, which the client is most concerned with, reflects what they need.
Okay.
Right.
So if you could even let's dig in a little bit more on that. So proposal and RFP comes through the door, or a client that you've worked with in the past reaches out and says, hey, we'd like to negotiate this with you. Here's the project that we're thinking. What does step by step, what does that look like when it's coming from the Gilbane side of things?
Sure, yeah. And I think at some point we should probably get into like the delivery method. A lump sum bid is different from a negotiated, CM services agreement, so on and so forth. But, so it's all relative. But like, let's say it is a CM agreement, early days, napkin sketch, so on and so forth. A client wants to hire a CM to help them, guide them through the process. They put an RFP on the street that we respond to. Gilbane has a business development team, that's responsible for chasing down those leads, bringing those leads in the door, overseeing the proposal effort, marketing, so on and so forth. And then every project is assigned a project executive to shepherd and oversee the RFP response. And that ultimately, if we were successful, would be in charge of building the job.
So you said, forgive me, I was making a little note that you said they put a PX in charge of?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I would, in charge, I would say they're in unison with the business development manager who brought in the lead or is responsible for the lead.
And they would be the PX on the project, obviously.
In theory, if they're awarded, yes. Yep. And so an RFP comes in the door. PX is assigned. The business development manager is there to oversee the process. We read the RFP, engage the 5 families at Gilbane. What does this RFP say about what are the deliverables for is an estimate required? Is a conceptual schedule required? Is it just qualifications, a resume of Gilbane projects that are similar in the past? Basically a full debrief of the RFP. And from then it's like Captain America. Who needs to do what? All right. If there is an estimate involved, what level of the estimate are we talking about? Can we do this in house? Is it based on a napkin sketch? Is there more detail that we want to get information from the street? Market pricing, so on and so forth. What level of schedule do they want? Is it a very simple one-pager rough bar chart, or are they really concerned about one particular aspect of the job? And we're talking about full critical path schedule. Do they want model coordination to give a 3D site logistics idea of how Gilbane would attack the job? That's when we pull in the VDC team. So it really depends on what the client's asking for, and/or what we really want to leverage and showcase in our response to the client.
Okay, and then it moves, assuming they approve you to move forward with it, then it goes to where?
Yep.
They say, yep, we like your approach.
So Gilbane is awarded the job, or Consigli is awarded the job in theory. So again, it depends on, and we'll talk about this, hopefully, it depends on how close are we to construction? How developed is the design?
No, good point.
Right? So if the owner has hired an architect early on and that design is in design development phase of design, or even maybe early construction documents, we're talking about a different thing versus if they literally have a one-page, or this is what the building looks like, Lego front cover type situation. But, so to Peter's point earlier, let's say it's early days, we have a napkin sketch, we would do what we would call a conceptual estimate, right? So we don't know, what's inside the building per se in terms of structure, MEP systems, but let's say it's all cast in place structure. Let's say it's not, let's say it's precast or steel. We can assign dollar value, rough rule of thumb dollar values to each one of those circumstances. What kind of HVA system, in theory, does this napkin sketch have? Plumbing system, so on and so forth. What are the grade of finishes? We come up with a conceptual budget. And that's usually, based on a cost model. The last 5 of these jobs that Gilbane has done, how did we do on pricing? Rules of thumb, square foot pricing for HVAC systems, that sort of thing. Develop a conceptual budget. Sometimes we're doing that when an owner has not indicated where they would like to be, and that's often the case, which is tough, frankly, because we want to work with a client and say, okay, well, what's your budget? We can make assumptions to get you there. But if they don't, we deliver them a conceptual estimate. It either works with their budget, hopefully, or it doesn't, and that triggers other things.
Presumably there's more spinning of wheels when they don't give you those guide rails or that number, right? Because then you're like, all right, well, we're going to show 20 different possibilities of building this thing, whereas if we knew the budget, we could look at 4 of them seriously, but instead we're going to look at more.
Yeah, Greg hit it on the head with regard to the overall process, but a lot of times we will get hired just for pre-construction services. So that whole construction piece of it might not come to fruition. So the goal of pre-con is to bring it in on budget and build it, be able to build it within the schedule allotted, and give the owner the aesthetic value of the building that he wants and the functionality of the building he wants. So that's the first piece. You're going to put your best team together to propose on the RFP based on their expertise and knowledge. You're going to propose on that, and then they're going to pick your team, but then you got to get to the goal line before you even move into construction. So that's the pre-con piece.
The job, very well, to your point, may not be a viable job, if it's a developer job, if it's not a school that already has a bond funded for it. It could go away, it could vaporize if they can't make the
like you
budget
said,
work.
like there's a goal to pre-con that might be, if they hire you as a service, let's tell me, does this work or not?
Right. And that's one of the toughest things, right? So, and you also have to collaborate and work with the architect and the design team and such to make sure everybody's on the same page with regard to budget and design. And that's what that pre-con team, that valuable group of people, can bring to the table. Most of our pre-con people have an architectural background, or a lot of them do. They have a lot of knowledge. They've been doing it for a long, long time, and they bring that knowledge and experience to the table to fine-tune the napkin sketch into something that is feasible budget-wise and can happen on time. And in addition to that, put the plan together for the logistics and all that stuff. So,
okay, I'm trying to restrain from digging into the details at the moment, because I want to have these really in-depth, because I have a lot of questions about even the things that both of you said already. But so maybe a better way to frame the question was on a textbook process. And what's a textbook? I don't know. But in an ideal world, that process from pre-con, working to that number, looking at the different options, then it goes to estimating, where they start putting some dollar values on that. Can you finish just with like a kind of ideal step process?
Absolutely.
Because I want to hear like, okay, how does Gilbane step through that?
Sure.
And then I want to hear
and
from
it is
Peter
different.
how
We've talked
Consigli.
about this, so it would be interesting. So we have an estimating team that does cost estimating, right? And that might involve a little bit of going out to market partners and get updated trade costs, that sort of thing. But in theory, we're doing might do a conceptual estimate, design progresses. We might do a schematic design estimate, design progresses. We might do a design development estimate, design progresses. We're on budget. Okay, the design is on track. Finish the construction documents, right? So the architect, engineer finish construction documents to a level of quality such that it's crystal clear, the risk is identified, and we can go out to the street and buy the work. And by buy the work, we mean contract electricians, plumbers, so on and so forth. Again, the delivery method depends. If we're in a CM agreement, generally, construction documents for site and structure will come early, and we can start to buy out, quote unquote, that work while HVAC systems are still being tweaked. And so you'd have a phased buyout. You buy site and structure today. 2 months from now, you buy MEPs and facade. 2 months from then, interiors, that sort of thing. And that allows us to buy that early work early, right? Long lead items early, and you sort of have a phased progression versus a designer needs to design everything, cut the cord, print the plans, put it on the street, buy it out all at once. So those are kind of different models in terms of what situation you're in.
And for younger folks, that's what you'd hear, like early bid packages.
Correct. Right? Early bid packages, steel, structure, concrete, that sort of thing.
And then just to delineate, when does that handoff go from estimating to purchasing?
Sure, yeah. So purchasing at Gilbane is taking buildable documents, putting them on the street, bid invites, 3+ bidders, solicit those bids, manage the RFIs that come in. Hey, something's still not clear. Okay, architect, engineer, let's get a response. Collect bids, level bids. By that I mean making sure bids are apples to apples. If somebody's not including something they should, we can rope it in. Make an award. Oftentimes that involves a sign-off from our owner, because we're in a CM delivery method. Please, Mr. and Mrs. Owner, let us spend your money, especially if we're early days and we don't have a GMP yet. It's an early steel package. We don't have a total budget yet. We need to order this steel, cut a steel contract. Once we have their approval, that's the end of the purchasing process for Gilbane.
And purchasing is writing the contracts, not the project manager.
That's correct. Yep. Yep. And glad you asked that question. So operation, what we call operations, PM, supers, engineers, they're at our side throughout the life of this, helping us define the scope of the work, how they want to build the job, certainly working on site logistics, schedule, that sort of thing. So it's not as if purchasing does this in a vacuum at Gilbane, at least. We really want our teams to be responsible for where the line in the sand is, because they're going to own it once the shovel hits the ground, right?
Yep.
So they're there, but they do not, PMs and such do not have the authority to write contracts at Gilbane. So that's where purchasing comes in.
Okay, all right. Now Consigli.
Greg's done a great job of basically telling you all the bits and pieces, right? Where we differ, we're a little bit different than the Gilbane thing is our purchasing people get involved a little bit earlier, because the knowledge of what the subcontractors can bring to the table and bringing the right subcontractors to the table to start the pricing, even at conceptual or schematic or DD, is really, really important, because that's going to get you to the end line. It's going to get you to the best number quicker. You know what I mean? So you don't want to wait all the way till you got a hard set of contract documents, even to put out for the early release packages.
Sure.
You want to kind of figure out who those subcontractors are up front to get them involved early in the game. So same defined plan, right? So the process is all the same, but I think we get involved. There's a lot of gray areas where the purchasers will be dragged in a little bit earlier into even the pre-con stage, not so much the estimating stage, just to inform our team about, hey, these subcontractors are very good at this. Because if you think about it, like, we started off with a centralized purchasing group. We've always had a centralized purchasing group. Our centralized purchasers talk to these subcontractors day in and day out. The estimators, for all intents and purposes, they have a limited amount of time to go out and get numbers. So they don't collaborate, they don't talk, they don't communicate with the subcontractors as much as the purchasers do when you're getting down to the brass tacks. So in doing that, we're identifying the fact whether the subcontractor needs work in a certain time frame, what he does very well, because we're checking out experience and references and stuff like that. We know exactly what the subs are all about, so that we take that knowledge and plug it into the pre-con stage of whatever the project is, and make sure the right group of subcontractors are participating in the efforts.
Yeah, absolutely.
To bring that price in at the right price earlier. I don't know if you kind of follow that, but if you get the wrong cast of characters bidding the wrong set of, the wrong project, you're not going to have the right outcome.
I completely get it. Yeah. Who writes the contracts in your place?
The purchasers do.
The purchasers.
But we do have a little bit of an overlap. We've always run extremely lean with regard to centralized purchasing. Granted, I have 25 purchasers, but it's more like a resource thing. We've run lean because we want to be as efficient as humanly possible. So if you're on a big project, the purchaser will basically put together a plan to buy the entire job out based on the construction schedule. So then they jump in like a firefighter, and they're buying the ground up, and they're buying the long lead trades right off the bat. So site, concrete, HVAC, electrical, all the stuff that needs to be bought. They are entirely responsible for getting the project off on the right foot. As we start coming down the home stretch, that last 20%, toilet accessories, whatever the case may be, landscaping, we may pass that on to the project team to buy. Only because the project team is now on the job site. They may have some time to buy some of these trades out, and then
Fairly
they
low
will
risk too. Yep.
And
They'll
a good understanding of the project, right? They've been looking at the
good
documents
understanding of
now
the project,
for a long
but
time.
think about it. You have a budget to put a project manager on a job for a year, 2 years. If you get to the point where you don't have to buy landscaping for a year, you might as well task that to the project team, so when they have some downtime, they're already on the job, they can buy that out. Now my purchaser frees up to go on to the next critical buyout, package on a different job. So it's just an efficiency thing. So do we let them write contracts? Yes, we do. Do we bird dog them, and do we check what they're doing? Yes, they do. Is there a formal process? Absolutely.
But I guess it also it must be a cost thing too, right? Like, why, if that person is a cost of the job already, why have the purchasing department?
Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
Well, you have a project engineer that's tasked to be on that project site for a year. Why can't he buy out the toilet accessories or the non-critical trades if he's got some capacity? And oh, by the way, he's learning from that. He's getting more of a well-rounded education on everything on that. He's doing a little estimating, he's doing a little purchasing. So it's actually beneficial across the board.
Now, you refer to it as central purchasing. How big of an area do purchasing groups cover? Because you guys are both bigger companies. Are you just Massachusetts? Are you like how wide a net does purchasing cast? I guess in yours, Peter, and then in yours, Greg.
All regions. So I basically, the way we're organized is I have a lead regional purchasing manager that's responsible for a region. And then he might have a purchaser or two that work underneath him buying the jobs out in that region.
So, for example, you have a DC office, you have a purchaser in DC?
Sitting right in DC right now.
Okay. And then
And a
he
regional
reports
that
back.
oversees him. Yeah.
But he reports back to you.
He reports back to a regional purchasing manager. And
Okay.
the regional purchasing manager reports to me.
Okay.
So, but that being said, we all collaborate every 2 weeks and we talk together and we go through assignments every 2 weeks to make sure everybody's on track. So, you know, the good thing about having a centralized purchasing department is we've been doing it for so long. It's a real definitive process. And every, year we add another little tweak to make it a little bit better. So it's very well controlled. But I'd have to say, yeah, we support all regions, and that's many offices in New York, DC, Connecticut, Maine. I get a purchaser for every single region for all intents and purposes.
Nice. And you, Greg?
Yeah, Gilbane is a similar but a little bit different again. So I would consider what Peter's group does true centralized purchasing in terms of it all rolls up to Peter. At Gilbane, it's different. We have centralized purchasing, and in other words, I think most people in the industry would think of that as like purchasing writes the contracts, not the PMs. Like, the purchasing effort is centralized to the office. Gilbane has purchasing agents in every one of our business units and every one of our divisions. So we have over 40 offices across the country. New England, as an example, is a division of Gilbane. So we have 4 offices in New England. Each one of those offices has purchasing staff that roll up to me as the division purchasing leader, but there is no purchasing person above me. All of the chief purchasing agents at Gilbane have a peer group, and all of the collaboration certainly happens, but it's at a very distributed, sort of decentralized, in that sense, decentralized way, I guess. So absolutely, we purchase on the ground. Other CMs purchase from afar. They have people who might manage a territory, but they sit in the corporate office somewhere and do all the contracting there. No, we have purchasing agents in our marketplaces, which is very important because you need to know your market.
I was going to say the national approach seems really like
it's tough. Yeah. Unless you're a travel CM, like a CM that just doesn't have distributed offices, then it maybe makes sense. But you really need to know your marketplace. You need to know who do I want to work with that's already tied up at Consigli and so on and so forth.
It seems very flawed to try and do it on a national level. You just don't have the intelligence of what's happening in that local market.
Sure. You need boots on the ground. So when we get to the point where we need a boots on the ground person, we put them there because it's all about, if there's one thing it's all about building relationships. Right, so that's the one, critical thing you have to do in whatever you're doing is create relationships. So when we get to the point where we need a definitive boots on the ground guy, we put a guy there. But that being said, I don't like the silo situation because understanding what everybody's doing, not at all times, but communicating and once again collaborating all the time with regard to what everybody's doing in all the different regions is also important because then I can leverage my volume as Consigli to help out DC. So we then have other subcontractors that may go to different regions, so I can kind of put the thumb on a specific guy to help me out in a different area. So if you have silos, you might not have that communication. You need to keep that open to really take advantage of the volume you push through every single year as a big CM.
Absolutely.
So can we talk a little bit, I know it's not in your wheelhouses, but it's not your specific tasks, I should say, but when it comes to estimates, what are the different stages? And I know Greg brought up a great point. Well, it depends on what we're dealing with. Is it something where they handed us a bunch of stuff and they want to start in 3 weeks, or is it something that's just early phase stuff? But what are the possible kind of estimate options that are out there? This, people kind of understand order of magnitude, like what?
Sure, and it's all relative to the amount of detailed design information you have. When you're doing a conceptual budget, again, you might have some 3D renderings and that's it. You're really talking about orders, very rough orders of magnitude, and sometimes it could be threshold estimating. Like a low number would be X, a medium number would be Y, and a high number would be Z. Your project's somewhere in between there, depending on what finishes
finish.
Exactly. versus, if we're somewhere in the design development stage, like we have one-line diagrams for the MEPs, so we understand a little bit about the systems. We have some basic structural drawings, some decent site work drawings. We can do most of that quantity takeoff in-house, use our cost modeling database to, look into what the last 8 projects costed for export of material, blah, 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 and do a lot of that effort in-house. We might go out to a facade contractor, a glazing contractor, roofing, what's the current cost on the street, square foot for a TPO roof, so on, so forth. And use some market influence information there as well. Or we might be really close to having buyable, biddable documents, and we might be able to put those out to the street and say, hey, we understand you're not giving us a fixed price, you're giving us a budget, but this is close enough that I would really like you to take a look at it and tell me what you think it's worth. We'll do a parallel quantity takeoff, so we're talking the same quantities of brick, but really, what do you think this is worth? And then we do that with some of our strategic, trade partners to get that information.
So we have
does that answer your question?
Yeah. And let me say it back, and then you guys correct me where or clarify where necessary. So there's a rough order of magnitude number that's going to an owner. They have a conceptual set of documents, and that is going to be traditionally square foot quantity type takeoffs, maybe a little input from subcontractors. As the documents get better, what would you kind of call the next level of estimate? Do you even have a name for it where you
SD?
Yeah, the SD and DD are, design progression milestones, in terms of the method of estimating, quantity takeoff. If there's something to quantify on the drawings, you can do square foot of brick and square foot of curtain wall and tons of steel. I guess I would consider that quantity takeoff estimating versus like it's 100,000 square foot hospitals cost, whatever they do per square foot. That's rough order, very rough order of magnitude, right?
Okay. So then, once you have schematic or CDs, then you're starting to send it out to trades.
Yep. Yeah. And
is it fair to say it starts with conversations to trades, and then maybe the estimate after that is, hey, get me a real number. Here's the documents.
Start with conversations with different trades. Obviously, you want to make sure that you are carrying the right numbers based on what's happening in the industry at the time. So you're always getting feedback from subcontractors at whatever stage you're at. Maybe it's 10% as opposed to 80%. But as you move into the down the road with regard to the design, then you really start to get real with the subcontractors and tell them, hey, we flipped the drawings yesterday. You can put a hard number on this thing, and we got to start trending that way to get the budget in line.
Okay.
So, but every project goes down that road these days, right? Yep. So most of the time, like we talked about the RFP process, it starts with the conceptual set of drawings and a conceptual estimate, and you trend through that whole progression of multiple estimates to get to the point where it's like, all right, we're good to go. I think the budget's on target. Put it out on the street put it out on the street for pricing from multiple subcontractors on multiple trades. When you get to that point.
Okay. So
when it's defined.
Okay. So that as you keep improving that number, you're feeding that number back to the owner. Yeah. Right?
I don't know if it's approving, but
that's why I said you're feeding it to them. Yeah, you're saying, hey, here's how we're looking, and maybe if it's coming in higher, you start doing VE, which we can probably start to talk about in a minute. And then if you continue to get the green light, then you're saying, okay, we have good documents, send it out, get hard numbers. Now that you have these real numbers, I'll say, to work with, you still have to work with those numbers, correct? And that's where kind of purchasing gets involved?
Yeah, I mean, when you're coming down the home stretch now, you got good coverage on every single trade. Now it's game time. Now you really have to start talking to subcontractors about, this is really going to happen, so let's really get into the brass tacks and look at some of the details and make sure you have your best numbers in front of us, because we're going to make a decision in a week from now.
Okay. And then, so what's first? Is it, and maybe this happens after you decide on the contractor, I don't know, this is my ignorance, but I know at some point you're going to start de-scoping you're going to start bid leveling. Like once you have those hard numbers, when do you start doing those
That
type
process.
of things?
Sure.
Right when we get the numbers. I mean, we're developing a scope of work. Remember, in the background, we're developing the scope of work all the way along. So when we get to the point where we think we can buy it or we need to buy it because of the schedule, that's when we're going to start getting into the scope review.
Okay. And actually, forgive me, I want to back you up
Yeah.
a little bit. I missed something in there, which is we talk about it from an estimate standpoint. You're then sending it out to the subs. How are you deciding which subcontractors to even send it to?
Roll it back to pre-con and in the early estimating stages. You have to know your subcontractors and what they do well and what their capacity is, and you start putting that list together very, very early in the game. So when you're ready to go out for hard pricing, you're ready to go. And it's not like it's not linear. You could go out real early for pricing because a lot of things come into play. Hey, you could be buying off a SD set because the schedule dictates you have to start buying, right? You could have early release packages where you have to start buying. So the earlier you start to identify the right list of subcontractors for that project based on their skill set, based on their availability, based on their size, based on their regional touch, the better. Because then it just kind of rolls right into, all right, you know, we don't have to think about this now. We don't have much time to do this. We have the right subs already queued up. They know about their job. Some of them might be already pricing the job. Let's kick it down the road and get this thing bought out.
Yeah, I definitely see the value in doing that earlier. Just like every GC says,
Yeah.
if the owner would bring us in earlier, this would be better for them, right?
Right,
But what does that physically look like when you hear terms like pre-qualification, determining the right bidder? Like, what's that process? What does that look like? How do you decide that, contractor A, B, and C are the ones you want to go with and not D and E? Is it bonding capacity? Is it track record? Is it skill set? Like, what are you looking at to say, these are the people that I want to bid this?
Yeah, so
I think we both have a pretty definitive, robust pre-qual process where we're looking at qualifications. We're looking like true performance qualifications, the quality of what these guys do, references and such, financial stability. So we're looking at financial information from these subcontractors, and also, most importantly, is the safety side.
Record, yep.
Right? I think we do that with all our subcontractors across the board. That would be involved in this type of process.
Yeah.
Where it's like a CM at risk. We're not going to go out to the street to a guy we don't know and bring him in, and just because he's got a decent number, bring him into the program unless we know what they're all about. So the pre-qual, once again, we're drawing from a list of pre-qualified subcontractors when we're putting this list together, even as early as pre-con and estimate. Pre-con, we'll say.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, go ahead, Greta.
Yeah,
I have a question.
so you have to have a maintained pre-qualified database of pre-qualified trade contractors. So you're gonna take the unsafe contractors off the table, right?
Yeah.
Take the contractors who are not financially viable off the table. So you have to Gilbane, you have to get pre-qualified to work with Gilbane, and that means again minimum safety thresholds, minimum financial health, bonding capacity, that sort of thing. And that's your database. That's just living in the background all the time. Okay, now we have a job. It's a downtown Boston job. What is it? Is a hospital? Is there a PLA or not? PLA meaning all union trades or not. So we can take our database and do all kinds of toggling. Filter by work area, Boston. Filter by union trades. And then we can see a list of union folks that work in Boston, right? Filter by trade, plumbers. Okay, union plumbers in Boston. Okay, what do we think this package is worth? It's a $20 million plumbing package. Okay, we see all the financials. We see the bonding capacity. We see their backlog with Gilbane. So they might be bondable to $20 million, but they might already have $15 million worth of work with Gilbane, or they might have $15 million worth of work with somebody else. So we need to be able to evaluate. Those are some of the very basic database-driven, sortable, quick hit decisions. Then, okay, we have a short list of bidders that on paper work. Then we say, okay, has our superintendent or PM worked with these companies before? Is there any bad experiences that we need to take into consideration? Again, what is their current backlog? When does that backlog burn off? If this project is in the future, then we're good to go. Or if it hits at the same time that they have a big major project with us, maybe we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. So there's a lot of evaluation that happens, and you can do that at any point in time. You can run those databases at any point in time to be able to understand, who you might pick for budgeting effort, who you might actually invite to bid your project. Because if you take low number on the street, like and you don't have that visibility, you don't know if somebody's like overtaxed, you don't know if somebody's just about to go out of business, and so they're throwing a number on the street and just need to get that work. That's dangerous.
How are you capturing the historical performance? Like, I know there's been subcontractors that I have worked with that if you look at the financials, they performed fine on a job, but if you ask the superintendent and project manager, they say, I'd rather fucking blow my brains out than work with this
I don't know any of those. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about.
How does that get into your database?
Sure, yeah. Gilbane has a trade contractor evaluation tool in our own database, so we have at minimum our superintendents and PMs fill those out at closeout. Provide all the feedback that they want to provide on a trade contractor, and that also shows up in their scoring in our database. So, quick answer, but there's a tool.
So you guys kind of grading, both companies grade subcontractors?
We do, we do pretty much the same thing. At closeout, we send out a survey to everybody on the team, and they all have their little list of questions that they have to fill out. We also have a running real-time list of subcontractors that may be having some issues that we kind of keep close to the vest. I don't want to say that, it's the blacklist, but we keep a real thumb on the pulse with regard to who's performing in the field. And there's a reason for that, right? We also have a pretty good recommendation process. So when we get down the road of hiring a subcontractor, we have to recommend the subcontractor in-house to pretty much everybody in-house. All project execs across all regions, all general supers across all regions, to make sure that there's no issues out, with those subcontractors at that point in time. And by the way, it could be a minimal problem, and we could be fixing that problem by leveraging the award to get that done. You follow me? So the biggest thing is, once again, I think there's a little bit of a differentiator. We try to keep a really wide open line of communication going at all times with everybody in the house, so we can work together to make sure that we're providing a quality product all the time. We're selecting the right subs all the time.
I like that. I like that. Letting all the PXs and general supers or whoever you said there saying, "Hey, we're about to award this to this company. Raise your hand now if there's something we should be taking into consideration."
That's our internal process. And there's a misconception. A lot of newer people think that, Big Brother is watching. It's like, no, this guy could be failing out in Western Mass and just need 5 more guys out there, and you're about to award a package to him. So you could say, by the way, if I award this to you, you need to give me 10 guys out in Western Mass like tomorrow. So that's the benefit of it.
Or better, give me 10 guys out there in Western Mass, and then I'll award it to you. Not if I award it.
It's the same, right? I'm not going to give this to you until I see the effect of what you're telling me you're going to do. But that's the big picture. And like I said, the more you can keep that intact globally, because we do use subs here that we use in New York City. We do use subs in Mass that we use in Connecticut. The more that line of communication stays open, the better.
And that's the true power of having quote unquote a centralized purchasing to some degree or another. Listeners might be listening on a smaller company. I have all my PMs or PXs buy out all my work. Well, if you're doing buyout one job at a time and then you need to execute that job, the next time you're doing buyout is 2 years from now. So when you pull that into a centralized group, you know what's happening in your entire company right now, and you can make decisions like that. You also know who's busy and who's not, which you may not know as a PM, right? And you also can learn from your mistakes quicker. Oh, we forgot to buy something. We missed some detail in some drawing. If a PM missed a detail in a drawing, they're going to feel that real hard, but they might not remember that 2 years from now when they go out to buy their next job. So, same thing. If we come across an issue in buyout, it's boom, communication, blast out. Make sure you look for this, that, or the other thing on your next buyout. Is anybody buying roofing right now? Have you heard about about the issues out there, you can address things very, very quickly.
Yeah.
As opposed to like a cyclical purchasing experience.
Another benefit of centralized purchasing, because inherently those issues got to roll back, and we roll those issues or items back into our, we'll call them their standard leveling sheets, scope review leveling sheets, so that you don't miss it going forward. So once again, all these purchasers that are buying stuff, if they come up with all these little issues, they're feeding that information back to our estimating and pre-con group to make absolutely sure that there's some kind of lesson learned on this project that gets rolled into the next project, right? So we once again, we get better and better as we go.
Yeah. No, it makes sense, because I often felt that way back in my building inspector days. I would see the companies that had a person that did permitting.
Yeah.
Similar thing, yep.
The process was smooth because the person knew how this was. But there was some bigger companies that would just have their project managers or the supers do the permitting. And it was a disaster every time because they're starting from scratch, or like you said, like, oh yeah, I did this, but it was 3.5 years ago. Like I kind of remember what it is, and stuff's getting missed. And you would just see the companies that had one person, also the comfort level. And I wonder if you guys experience the same thing with subcontractors. Like as a building inspector, I had a comfort level that this person who was handing me the documents and saying, oh, hey, we would like to start doing X, Y, and Z. We're just waiting on this. Are you okay if I do that? I'm much more comfortable saying yes, because this is a person that I see every day.
You're going to see him next week and ask
what does it roll back to?
Thing.
It rolls back to the relationships. It's all about the relationships at every single level. We have a guy in the Boston office that's a fantastic guy, extremely knowledgeable. He knows everybody in in Boston, so he can get that anything, approved immediately because of the long-term standing relationships.
Chris?
Yeah, Chris.
Chris Garvelis.
Yep,
A+. He's the one. There was that's where, for people listening, there was an overlap. I was looking for somebody, and I had spoken to Greg a while back. I was like, hey, we want to find someone in the same kind of space. And he said, oh, Consigli might be good. And I had reached out to Chris, and I was like, hey, who's the right person? Consigli gave me a couple names. Obviously, you were one of them.
Chris is aces.
And then a week later, Greg's calling me and going, I just met this guy, Peter Capone. And
Oh, boy.
Chris Garvelis already told me he was the guy. So I was like, it's some serendipity here. So, there's all those added benefits with central purchasing, right? Those relationships, the picking up the mistakes, having a central hub, all excellent. So you have your kind of corporate-wide, pre-approved, pre-qualified subcontractors. You're pulling from that pool, filtering it down to the right people for the job based off of capacity, costs, and then what are some of the final kind of maybe intangibles that you're looking at when you really define?
Yeah, I mean, I think then it comes down to what are you buying? What is the job? What is the complexity? From a concrete standpoint, is it just foundations and flat work, or is there a complicated core? Is this a high rise, or is this a school? There's sort of like a gut feeling of who the major players are in each one of those market spaces, and who has different skill sets, and then it comes down to, again, the experiences of our team. We might even go so far as knowing what foreman might be available, because our teams have certain foremen that they really like working with, and if that foreman's tied up on this job, we might know that they don't have another good one that we like working with. So stuff like that comes into play. But in general, once you do that filtering, if safety-wise, financial good fit, they perform in the marketplace that we want to buy that work in, they're not taxed with backlog, they're union because they need to be, or what have you, then it's fired out. I mean, we have an interest in getting as many numbers as possible, right? We have an obligation to our client to do that, to get best value. So we're playing both sides, right? We don't want to limit the bidding pool so we only get 2 or 3 bids, but we also don't want to go out to the world and folks who might not be qualified to do the work or might be too taxed.
Right. No, I agree. I don't know, like, when you say intangibles, I kind of don't understand what you're looking for. Like, other than
well, I guess maybe you better say like something that wouldn't show up in a spreadsheet. And I think kind of when Greg talked about the foreman, right? Because you know what my mind went to was, I wonder if you could almost inversely and say like, oh, you know what? We have such and such for a super out there.
Yeah.
They're super strong. They could take this guy with the low number and drag him along.
Sure, yeah, sure.
Or we have somebody
That's
who's
a really good
like,
point.
if we're staying with concrete,
Yeah.
right? But you know what? We have a super with very limited concrete experience that's on this job. Like, we need S&F. Because
Right.
we need someone that has done this a million times, and they're going to give us X for a foreman. And even if our super doesn't know how to do it,
Right.
like are those, like, you're getting
Totally.
that great?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's what I mean by, sorry, not to cut it, but to answer your question, that's what I mean by the intangibles. Like, you know, you can filter for their bonding capacity and their safety record and the union or non-union, but you can't.
On paper, they look good. But
Yeah.
No, to get those intangible items out on the table, like the foreman, which we do quite a bit, you got to keep everybody in the loop at the same time. So you got to make absolutely sure you're talking to operations, because those are the guys who will say, hey, this is really complicated. I know you're just buying this off a set of documents, and you might not understand all the idiosyncrasies about this project, but this is the guy we need on this job from S&F, period, end of discussion.
Yep.
So as long as you're keeping everybody in the loop, I guess, from the operations side, which we do, we don't buy in a silo, because that's another issue that people, newer hires come on board and they say, well, you're just going to buy my job and hand me a bunch of contracts and then move on to the next one. You don't care about me. You need to keep that door wide open to operations and everybody that's going to be involved in the project to make absolutely sure that you're fielding all of their information and their requests and plopping that into the overall award too. So a lot of moving pieces, right?
Sure, yeah, totally.
It's not as simplistic as you would think. Yeah, I got 3 quotes. Yeah, this guy's low. Yeah, he's pre-qualified. Just hire him. You got to have a lot more interaction with the people on your team to flush some of maybe that stuff out to get the right crew or whatever.
Now, the bid leveling and de-scoping.
Yeah.
What's happening pre-award versus award? And then maybe even, I'll throw a third thing in there to make this really complicated and cause chaos. Value engineering. Maybe let's start with value engineering, because that's something that you guys might be doing without the input of your sub, right? Like,
Sometimes it's both. Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay. So
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so value engineering, let's start there. From a value engineering standpoint, not what the sub is doing by saying, hey, if we go with this filter instead of that filter, it's the same thing and it costs you 20% less. But big picture, when you're talking with the owner and said, hey, I know this was designed cast in place, but if we do precast plank, we could bring the number down to here. So where is that happening in the process? Like, what's the value engineering process look like from a Consigli or Gilbane standpoint of, hey, here's our ideas that we do to kind of get the number closer to where the owner wants?
Yeah, sure. I think of the most succinct way to say this. So it depends on what's on the line, right? If we're talking about, like, should this building be structural steel or should it be cast in place? That is obviously a decision that needs to get made very early on. So that would be like sort of value management at the estimating level. Like, before we go any further on design, let's run the numbers about what the cheapest structure is, right? That's like an extreme example. But as we're further down the line in design and we're ready to put drawings on the street, then we can talk about, like, okay, is there a floor finish that gets you, the look that you want, but is cheaper, right? Or it could be as extreme, in schools we get this a lot lately, unfortunately. Like, we really want an auto shop, but we don't know if we can afford an auto shop. So we're going to design it, but then we're going to ask you what it costs if we wanted to take it out. Right, and that would be sort of an a la carte option that we would give our client. Like, we got our bids. Here's what it's worth. If you want to take it out, here's what it costs to take it out. Right. So it all sort of depends. And then there's voluntary, what we would call voluntary value management or VE items, meaning a trade contractor unsolicited says, hey, I looked at your specs and plans.
This, like,
my bid is
right?
worth X, but if you change the air handlers to this spec, I can give you $500,000 back or something like that. And so that's another way you can find money, quote unquote, in a job.
Yeah, no, I agree with him entirely. Okay. You know, but it starts early. Once again, I got to tell you, like every single time we do a job, we're fighting the budget, right? Because as the design starts to get fine-tuned and gets more and more finished and defined, is inherently the price is going up because you're providing more definition, right? So you're always in a value engineering mode on pretty much every project.
So as that price comes up, you're trying to drag it back down.
As the price comes up, you're trying to figure out, all right, well, what did we do? I mean, did they over-design this piece of it? Did they over-design that piece of it? Not to throw anybody under the bus, but I mean, it just happens.
Yeah.
So we're always looking for avenues. That's why, once again, it starts with pre-con. The group of people you have doing pre-con, the group of people Consigli has doing pre-con, they're phenomenal people. They're very knowledgeable. They have very good backgrounds, and they can flush that stuff out right up off the bat with regard to, what are you trying to do here? What's your building look like? This is what you have defined in the document, so this is what you think you need to do here. Why don't we try this? It's a little more feasible. It might be a little more cost effective, and it'll do the same exact thing that product number one will do.
Okay.
So,
all right. So we now have getting towards the finish line here of the process, of the bio process. You've got your pre-qual subs. You'd be happy with any of the three.
Yeah.
Where does that bid leveling and descoping happen?
Well, you've got your prices in, right? So you have a set of documents that everybody's on the same page. We're going to buy off this set of documents. Then you typically would bring all three. I'd say, like, even if you have, I don't know how you guys address this, but one of the toughest things for me is if you got like five numbers, we're built for speed, right? We got to get through this thing right away. You should be talking to all the bidders. There's going to be a different conversation you're going to have with the very high bidder as opposed to the very low bidder. But to answer your question, coming down the home stretch, you're getting into a detailed scope review with the team on the line with the three low qualified bidders, and then you're giving them a certain time period to turn over any additional pricing they may need to turn over based on your discussions and missing stuff and whatnot. And then you're asking them for a best and final price, and whoever comes with the best and final price, that's the sub you would like to select. Taken in consideration at that point in the game, when you're doing that, you have a set of qualified contractors. They all can do the job. They're all qualified to do the job. They all have the availability, and they're all pretty much within the same price range.
Okay.
Yeah. So at that point, you've already asked all the hard questions, like who do I want to work with?
Right.
Well, if you don't want to work with them, don't invite them to bid, right?
Yep.
So you get bids from people that you're comfortable doing the job. And then your obligation is to make sure that your bids are apples to apples, right? You want a fair and equitable process, right? And it's all about, at least at Gilbane, it's all about the type of information that you're asking for at time of bid. It's not just give me the lump sum, who's low bid. I want to know your lump sum bid value, and then I want to know, okay, well, what were your air handlers worth? What was your tin worth? What was your piping worth? And that way I can look at all of my bids on a bid comparison and say, okay, Acme so-and-so's ductwork is half of everybody else, and they're the low person. Okay, what is a problem? That's a problem, right? They missed something. So we ask for a lot of detail with our bids. We might also ask for unit prices, and that's for like future change orders, right?
Yeah.
So if we have a scope that's less than defined, we might ask people to bid out also unit prices, square foot of XYZ, and okay, somebody's way out in left field on the unit price for face brick, right? There's a problem there. So it's we try to do a really detailed evaluation of the bids, and we call people in. Then we ask about, okay, what's your anticipated manpower? What's your average? What's your peak? Who's the foreman you're going to put on the job? Do you agree to our schedule? What are your lead times? What other jobs might be in conflict with this one? And we're asking those same questions of everybody. We might also find that that one person is really low on the tin because the spec is ambiguous, and everybody else made an expensive assumption and they made a cheap one. Well, everybody else deserves to make the right assumption. Especially, we want to make sure we're not fighting battles later on. So we do what we call a post-bid supplement, right? After we collected the initial bids, after we had those bid review meetings, we move the line in the sand. Okay, we understand that there was questions about X, Y, and Z. Here are the RFI responses.
Right. You should be carrying 18 gauge.
Exactly. Here's a new spec. Here's an RFI response, a sketch, or oh, by the way, we just got an addendum that we need to buy. So please price that in with your best and final, and then you get best and final. And really, at that point, it's, who's the low person.
party's
You already know
over.
you want to work
Yeah.
with them.
Yeah.
We made sure the bids are equitable and fair. Low person wins at that point
Yeah.
in time, generally speaking.
Yeah, generally speaking. I think for the younger, newer people, it's like establishing the fact that if you get, we're not talking about the anomalies where you have a super low number and what do you do with that? You know what I mean? But you hit it on the head, Greg. You got to have points of comparison for every single trade, breakouts in every single scope of work, so you can compare what each subcontractor is carrying in their number and make sure they are apples to apples. So in other words, do they have the same square footage of carpet? Do they have the same square footage of resilient? Do they have the epoxy flooring? There has to be points of comparison. So when that wild card number comes in 20% low, you can give the
where that is. Where's the weak?
Why is there?
where is it?
Yeah,
Why? There's got to be a reason for it.
Yeah.
A lot of times we'll go to the high guy and say, what's driving your number? I know you belong in this group, you compete with this group, but you're 30% high. That 5-minute conversation may flesh out, well, did you see this detail on drawing number blah, blah, blah? And everybody else doesn't have it, right? So for I gravitate back to the newer people because I think this is where you're going with this. Overall, you got to have points of comparison. You can't just fly blind with a low number. You can't do it. You really have to go through that detailed leveling process to select the right subcontractor, right? And the more you talk to the subs, the more it'll get to that point where the numbers are going to get closer and closer and closer.
And that's what we're getting. Something we skipped a little bit in terms of what information are you putting out there with your bid invite that should be baked in the number. And you talked about scopes of work. Again, some people may not know, but scope of work is a written narrative of either how ambiguities in the drawings should be addressed. Or what, in addition to the drawings and specs, we need temporary services for X, Y, and Z. This activity should be on second shift, or we need so many comebacks, so on and so forth. That's in a written narrative. Some people call it an Exhibit B or a scope of work.
Right.
So new folks listening, putting out a set of plans and specs and saying, hey, give me a plumbing price. You are leaving a lot on the table there that you're missing. And we're not even getting into other stuff like safety plan, logistics plan, summary schedule, a sample contract. Like when you give me your number, I need to know that you're going to sign Gilbane's contract. I need to know you understand where you're going to put your materials on the job, when you're expected, you're wearing cast hard hats, so on and so forth. I mean, there's a lot more than just plans and specs.
There's multiple pieces of information, and then don't even go down the road of fine print. Like we've been doing it for such a long time that we take for granted that we probably have 17 different exhibits that we're putting out to the subcontractors on every single project that encompasses insurance requirements, subcontractor requirements, logistics, schedule, that it's just like, hey, this is the logistics schedule. Make sure you have this covered in your number. That's all on. How do you guys do it? We send out a leveling sheet. We basically put together a scope sheet, an Excel spreadsheet, covering all the scope of work and mentioning all those documents, including the construction documents. We send it to the subcontractor, make them fill it out and send it back with their bid. So we know that they have everything captured, and if there's something awry, we get into it.
So I guess this is the idea of bid packages.
Yeah, different.
Right,
yeah, that would be the bid documents.
And what work is going to fall under what scope, right? So okay, hey, this is all part of mechanical contractor, and we want that to be insulation, ductwork, process piping, whatever else.
Right.
Boom, that's a package, and that person can get subs or control wiring, whatever else. So you do it like that, right? And who's determining
the scope,
the scope of those packages?
What you're packaging into a bid package.
What we typically do is when we post all the documents on our website for bidding, we'll put together a spreadsheet for every single trade. We'll post a spreadsheet for every single trade that encompasses the scope work and everything I just described, right? It'll mention everything. So the subcontractor, if he's a drywaller or whatever his trade is, he goes to that folder and he opens that up and he grabs that spreadsheet, and that's how he bids the job. Now, do we further develop that as we go? Yes, because the estimator is the initial person who puts that initial standard leveling sheet together with some detail for the first pass. And then it may come back, and then we will, by the time we get to the point where the purchaser's talking to him, we've developed that scope of work more, right? So before we get to that final D scope.
So say that
So
again.
the
So
spreadsheet will change, add more detail.
in your world, that spreadsheet of bid packages by trade is generated, produced by the estimator?
Produced by the estimator, but once again, the lines are gray. The purchaser gets involved really, really early. So the purchaser's getting involved in letting the estimator know who to go out to bid to. The purchaser is looking over the estimator's shoulder to make sure the leveling sheets are comprehensive based on what they've seen on previous jobs. That's the lessons learned, right? So if the purchaser just bought a package and he came up with 3 or 4 things that have bitten him, or bitten my guys in the field, they are talking to the estimators on the next job and saying, oh, by the way, take your standard leveling sheet and add this, 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 and this, because that hurt us last time. So the estimator, in collaboration with the purchaser looking over the shoulder, puts together all those leveling sheets for every single trade, plops it in a folder for the initial bids, right?
So just to ask you a question, so like, and back to sort of bid packaging, right? If you were to, so you're sending out an invite to bid, and you really want your drywallers to carry fire extinguisher cabinets, or maybe even the ceilings, can they elect not to?
They can elect not to, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So they can sort of, it's almost like an a la carte menu. They can pick which divisions they want to bid on.
Yeah, they can, well, you know, they're going to bid the drywall, but if they don't want to do the fire extinguisher cabinet install, they can take it out. We might, I mean, now coming down the home stretch, we might force it on them. Force it on them.
Sure, yeah.
You know, if you want this job, you got to do this.
And then presumably the inverse is an option too, which is, let's say the drywall, or staying with that theme, carries all the safety, the handrails and toe kicks and everything on the job, and you get there and you say, hey, we want to self-perform that. Pull that chunk out.
We can pull it out. We can pull it out. You might not have good coverage on that stuff, so that inherently makes you pull it out. Hey, you know, this, or you might see inflated. Like if you force a subcontractor to price something, what's going to happen? He's going to say, "I'll do it. I'm just going to throw a bunch of money at it." Right? So you're going to see that. So it's like, all right, that's the wrong approach. Don't force him to do it. Pull it back out, and we'll figure it out, and we'll get either some other subcontractors to bid this, or we may self-perform it. So there's a lot of options as you go down the road.
Does Gilbane self-perform at all?
We have a self-performed division, Geo services, labor, temp safety, carpentry, that type of stuff.
Do you guys, do those groups just bid? I know that's what most companies do. They bid it like somebody else bids it, or?
We have a self-performed branch called Riggs. I want to say it's upwards of 600 people in the field self-performing. Our branch of guys in the field actually putting work in place is up to 600 or so employees now. They're fantastic. But yes, they'll bid. Everything's transparent, right? So everything we present to the client that we've mentioned, these spreadsheets and such, all the pricing is extremely transparent to the client. And oh, by the way, we got to lock down relationships with our subcontractors too. So we treat Riggs just like a subcontractor. You want to bid the metal siding? Send me a bid by next Tuesday at 2 o'clock, like everybody else, and we'll go through the same process of scope review with you, and you'll get the same opportunity. A lot of our clients will actually ask for their bid 24 hours prior to the other subcontractors' bids.
That's a good way to do it.
Just to protect, right?
Yeah.
So, but we do truly treat our self-performed branch like a subcontractor, so everything is fair. Because if you think about it, in some of the trades we do self-perform, like concrete, there are only a limited amount of big concrete subcontractors. If they think that you're going to give everything to Consigli or Riggs,
why bid?
they're not going to bid you.
Right.
So you have to give everybody a fair opportunity. You gotta have that conversation with the different subcontractors. You gotta, talk about it and make it absolutely clear that this is the approach. So, and once again, if you have the relationship, they'll believe you, and if you give them work, then it all works out well. But we treat them just like another sub.
You guys same?
Same. So we don't self-perform concrete and major trades is, again, job site safety related for labor and carpentry. And it all depends on what your owner contract says. Are you allowed to self-perform or have work performed on site by a subsidiary? Are job site requirements, general requirements reimbursable or not? So if we are allowed to use them and it is reimbursable, you're really talking about, a handful of laborers, however many you need, a handful of carpenters, they get the union rate, there is certain allowable markup by contract, and so and it's not a lump sum basis, it's like time and material is reimbursable. I'm giving you one example, there's many, but there are certainly many cases where we're either not allowed to use them outright, period, or if they do need to participate, they need to be competitively bid and that sort of thing. So.
And then you guys just typically slugging in a number for job site cleanup?
That's a big relative term. I mean, in terms of cleanup, yes. I mean, our teams use matter of thumbs for so many square feet of a hospital is this amount of dollars per square feet, or man hours per square feet versus a school versus a what have you. But that's just labor cleanup. I mean, job site safety and material handling, and I mean that's a whole nother thing. You can't just throw numbers at that. You really need to think about what's your schedule.
Yeah, I guess I just I know you just don't wing it. Like don't throw all this
rules of thumb. There's rules of thumb.
And you just put some dollar value, and then so the contract has a figure, but then you're just billing that at whatever rate plus the fee, like you determined.
To use that example, you would do that. Versus sometimes, with our drywall contractor, we want them, in addition to their own cleanup, provide so many laborers and so many buggies and a trash chute, and we might buy that scope with them.
Right.
If we can't self-perform it ourselves, or we don't have the bodies to do it, or something like that.
Okay.
We've done it both ways. We typically do it with our own people, but we've done it both ways.
Sure.
We approach it both ways.
Yep. Same thing with like the job site safety, right? You buy that out with the drywaller, and it's just one less thing you're dealing with. But then do you start running into like, the loading dock and the ramps are in my scope, but that wasn't in my scope, or is it usually just an hourly rate? Or
you want to know what you're buying. You can either say, you're holding an allowance of $100,000 in your contract for T&M on whatever I tell you to do. That's like the easy way. Or you can say, there's going to be 10 material load in, load out positions in the building with barn doors, and you need to maintain those with a yo-yo and corral, and like there's a defined scope that they assign a lump sum with. Where you get into trouble sometimes is like you own providing these things and maintaining them. Well, what happens if somebody's rough with the corral at the load in, load out? Like that's not their responsibility. Like how do they know how many times they got to replace that? Wood. So that's why oftentimes it's a rule of thumb, a bucket, an allowance. Time and materials go when I tell you to go.
Okay.
We like to control that. We like to control the safety on our job site. So we typically would try to self-perform all those items only because to maintain the safety on the project site and make sure that all that stuff is controlled and maintained throughout the course of the project. So I don't know if I would give that to another subcontractor, because then you get the he said, she said. Well, I don't know. It was, did you install it properly? Well, I don't know. We'd much rather control that.
I know we had a nice progression here to the finish line, but now I'd just like to drag you back a little bit.
Start over.
To the area where there's more gray happening. So super early in the process, Greg, you kind of outlined your groups that are involved. So you've got the back of the napkin, or you've got the super early RFP or whatever. Who's in the room? And to drive into what level are they involved with driving to that initial kind of first number, order of magnitude number that the owner is looking for?
Sure. Yeah, who's in the room? I mean, the numbers are being developed by the estimating team. In general, they're the spearhead, right? They hold the knowledge, but they're getting inputs from a scheduler who's hopefully getting inputs from a general superintendent that's assigned to the job. But, all right, we've assembled our estimate. Tomorrow we owe it to the client, or next week we owe it to the client. We always have, a closing meeting, basically estimate review meeting before we press print. Always the PX. Hopefully, if we can get them, the general superintendent. Always me to find out, okay, you got market numbers from so-and-so. Well, they're too busy. You probably want to get a second number, that sort of thing. yes, what did I say? PX, purchasing, estimating, at the very least, that's like the core group.
In the scheduling.
Schedule informs all of that.
Yeah,
They may
yeah.
not be at that meeting, but it informs the number, of course.
And now are you having the VDC folks start doing a rough model early on, or not yet?
Depends on the need and what you might need it
Yeah.
for. If you need it for sort of a more intimate understanding of the building, our VDC folks might help put it in assemble, if there is a model, and try to understand the building so we can think more critically about strange areas of the facade and how to price that and that sort of thing. But I wouldn't say it's not general practice, although I would love it to be. It's just oftentimes at that point we don't have much model information.
You may not need it right away.
Yep.
One size doesn't fit all. I mean, all the projects that we do are different, right, in some way. But I think you did a good job of describing who's in the room at that point in time. If you needed a VDC person in there because it's a hot point of a client,
they'd be there, yeah.
he's going to be there. But the Captain America is the project exec, and he just pulls in whoever he needs based on what he sees in the RFP he needs to do to make it, the best deliverable at all as possible. So.
Yeah. And the supers there thinking through like, okay, how many cranes are we going to need? How many, how do we want to approach this roughly?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
general super most of the time with us.
Yep.
You guys too?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, that was great. I learned a lot. I'm sure everybody listening learned a lot. And, yes, we kind of geared it towards someone younger, but also there are so many people that are just, the vast majority of people in this industry are not at companies like Turner and Consigli and Gilbane. They're at, medium-sized companies that don't have purchasers, or they're at small tenant fit outs, or even like the fair amount of owners that listen. And, maybe it's helpful for them to hear, like, okay, what's that process? What could I do to make the end result better? I know one owner in particular that does listen, and he's always very thankful to listen and hear, because he wants to hear how CMs are thinking about it. And last week I got a structural engineer that sent me a really lengthy message on LinkedIn, and he was like, it's really helpful to hear how a contractor is thinking. And even he was really excited to hear, because we talk a lot about permitting and all that kind of stuff, and he goes, I had no idea what goes through the permitting process. He goes, I stamp the drawings and sign an affidavit, and that's it.
Right.
He goes, I had no idea.
Yeah.
So we wanted it to be super 101, but I think you're going to be surprised that it's going to be interesting to a lot more people than just green folks in the market. So I appreciate.
So the next time we're going to bring like 4 quotes in here, and we're going to make you buy.
We're going to see what you learned.
I like it. What did you learn?
Well, Greg
this is the 201, right?
Yeah. And Greg wanted to throw a subcontractor in here before. I'm like, all right, it's already going to be friggin' chaos. I said,
do that. You can do that.
We'll get Chris in here next time. We'll have Chris McPherson.
No, I think it would be fun, because it would be interesting to have a counterpoint to you guys, because you guys are both like, that's a great way to do it. There might be some subcontractor being like, these fucking clowns,
here we go,
they screw this up and screw that up, and I think it would be, I think it would be good to hear. So maybe there's a follow up there, but excellent. I appreciate it, and thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having us.